Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay, here to talk a little bit about. We did the Wicked review of Wicked for Good, so I want to go back and review the original Wizard of Oz, the original story of the Wizard of Oz, the film from 1939. This film, I'm sure everybody has seen it. It is a classic in American cinema. It is one of those films that are mentioned when you talk about the evolution of film. Set the stage a little bit. It is the adaptation, the big film adaptation of L. Frank Baum's novel, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, which was published in 1900. It took them uh, 39 years to create a big budget version of it. There were other stage versions of it almost immediately. L. Frank Baum himself tried to get it produced, in the early days of Hollywood, because this was his magnum opus. This was his lifelong ambition. Okay, but it never really materialized, at least what's going on. Then in 1937, Walt Disney puts out Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. We talked about it. And this is an avenue for fantasy stories, children's stories, to be brought to the big screen. So Disney attempts to purchase the rights to to L. Frank Baum's story, from his wife, Maud Baum, Maud Gage Baum, who's still alive in his estate. But unfortunately, because this holds a special place in Walt Disney's heart, because the story takes place in Kansas, and Walt Disney himself grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, in the state next to it. So he wanted to have this as well. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen. Metro Golden Mayer, Louis B. Mayer studio, a rival studio to Walt Disney, gets the rights to it, and they produce it. And they had a specific reason why they wanted to have it, because the actor that ends up playing first the Tin Man and then the Scarecrow, they wanted to have it specifically for him. First, they wanted Eddie Cantor to be the Scarecrow, but and then he backs out. See, at this time in Hollywood, actors were signed to contracts with studios, right? This was the studio system era of Hollywood, where an actor would be signed to a studio, and that actor could only work in movies produced by that studio, whether it was MGM, whether it was Universal, whether it was Paramount. Actors were signed. At least a hashtag movie history. Actors were signed to studios, right? And it was this way in the movies since until the 1970s, when we talked about the newer directors, like we talked about it when we did Hook, and a few times when we did Star Wars. When the newer directors came out in the 70s, Francis Ford Coppola, George Lucas, and Steven Spielberg, they broke this, and the actors have more freedom after that. But during this time, if an actor was signed to a specific studio, that actor had to perform a specific amount of movies produced by that studio, similar to how wrestling is. We know about how wrestling is. If you're assigned to WWE, you got to work for WWE. That's it. You can't work for anywhere else, right? So actors were like that too. So this guy Eddie Cantor, he was signed to Metro Golden Mayer. They wanted him to play the Scarecrow, but he at the last minute. So that's why they rush ahead and buy it from Disney. So at the last minute, he backs out. So they got to get another guy, Buddy Ebsen, to do it. But they want Buddy Ebsen to play they want him to play the Tin Man, right? And he's like, no, he wanted to play the Scarecrow because he saw the 1924 stage play of it that was produced in 24, and his mentor, Fred Stone, played the Scarecrow, so he wanted to play the Scarecrow part. So he did certain scenes playing the Tin Man, and he did other scenes later on playing the Scarecrow because they finally gave him his way. But what about the main character of Dorothy? Dorothy was, now this is very interesting because as I discussed with Lisa, in the novel, in the book, Dorothy is 9 years old, right? That's her age, 9 years old. All throughout the books. But they didn't want to deal with child actors. You know what I mean? Because they felt like child actors were unreliable. And really, there was only a few. One was Shirley Temple, who she did audition for the part, but she didn't get it, right? And there weren't that many. So they came up with Judy Garland for the role. Now, Judy Garland at this time was a teenager. Now, you can imagine the logistics for this. This is a female teenager, supposedly be playing a 9-year-old girl. Now, anybody that knows anything about biology knows that a teenage female has something called breast, obviously, that a 9-year-old doesn't possess. So what they had to do was they had to cover her breast up by taping them up, during the shoot. And also, even though women don't go through the exact same changes during puberty that men go through with a deep voice, a teenage voice is deeper. A teenage female voice is deeper than a 9-year-old girl's voice. So they had to give her certain drugs to make the voice, less mature. And they also had to give her drugs to control her mood. They gave her Benzedrine on the set. But so they were really drugging her up, which would eventually lead to a lot of her issues, later on in life. Now, but they did cast her, right, as the role. And other issues with it were the casting of Margaret Hamilton. Margaret Hamilton, initially, she plays the role of the Wicked Witch of the West. Initially, upon getting the role, she thought maybe they would pick her for the Good Witch, Glinda, but they don't. They pick her for the Wicked Witch, and she has mishaps happen to her on the set. This I didn't know about. This Lisa told me about through a video yesterday, where she suffers third-degree burns, and then they have to bring in a stunt double, and the stunt double suffers burns from this. Not to mention the makeup that is a bitch to get off. So right off the bat, there is a lot of issues with making this film. And then you have the director issues, right? You have the director issues. Victor Fleming was brought in to be the director of this film. Problem is, Victor Fleming already is signed up for another film that's coming out the same year, Gone with the Wind. So he leaves in the middle of production for Wizard of Oz to go shoot Gone with the Wind, and they have to find somebody else to do it. So you're going through like 2-3 different directors. And then the producer. Noah Langley. He doesn't feel, he wants to make some adaptations to it because according to the book, Oz is an actual place. Oz is not a dream. Oz is a place, right? Oz exists. But he feels like, oh, people won't buy into that. That's too fantastical. So in the end, they do a rewrite where they make it a dream, and everybody, the Cowardly Lion, the Scarecrow, and the Tin Man are all Dorothy's, uncles, and the lady who tried to steal her dog in the beginning of the movie. Which that's not in the story. You know what I mean? And another change they decide to make is the color of the slippers. In the book, the color of the slippers are silver. They're silver slippers, right? But they feel like um, silver is not a color that captures a lot of people's attention. Notice my color scheme. Yesterday we talked about Wicked, and I used the red slippers. Now we're talking about the original. I used the silver the silver shirt. I used the red shirt. Now I use the silver shirt. Kind of backwards because Wicked went back to the original story and they used the silver slippers. They only turned red, at one little part. But Wizard of Oz, the movie, uses the red slippers. They felt like red was a more attractive color, so they made them red. Also, right, but it's backwards. It's backwards though, Lisa. I should have used the silver shirt for Wicked and the red shirt for Wizard of Oz, because in Wizard of Oz they're red, in Wicked they're silver. In the book they're silver, right? But anyway, another change they make is that in the book, Kansas is like he spends 5 minutes on Kansas, right? Whereas in the movie, she's in Kansas for a pretty long time before she actually gets to Oz. They felt like they were trying to make it more real, which is stupid when Hollywood tries to do this, because it's a movie about munchkins and witches and talking scarecrows. How real, how realistic you want the shit to be? It was a book written for children, and they always do this. Oh, it's not realistic. Well, look at it. Like, I mean, have you read the story? What I mean? Like, but regardless, they wanted to make it relatable to all ages. So, in other technical mishaps, they have a scene, and we'll get to when we talk about the entire movie. They have a scene where there is snow because they pass out in poppy fields on their way to see the wizard. They pass out, and there's snow. The good witch sends snow to revive them. Well, guess what? The snow is made of asbestos, a deadly chemical that could kill everybody. So they really didn't think this shit through. Also, there is a rumor, never substantiated, but there is a rumor that Munchkins, little people actors that were playing the Munchkins in Munchkinland actually unalive themselves right in the set as Dorothy and her friends are singing lions, tigers, and bears, oh my, lions, tigers, and bears, oh my. So Lisa says they really didn't think it through. Yeah, they didn't. Right. And in the background, you see a munchkin. You can see a shadow of a munchkin hanging themselves. So Lisa says that they really didn't think it through. She's right, they didn't. But there was a reason for this. A movie like this had never been made on this scale. You know what I'm saying? Movies were very cheap at that time. You know what I mean? Most of the movies that were out were like, silent films like Charlie Chaplin, or movies like historical movies about the Civil War, like Birth of a Nation or The Jazz Singer. Movies bringing fantastical worlds to life were not really made. They thought Snow White was a gamble, so they didn't. And that was an animated film. This was live action. They never really had experience doing stuff like this, yet. And also, with the medicines that they were giving Judy Garland, she started to laugh uncontrollably at the Cowardly Lion. So the guy that played the Cowardly Lion, he slaps her for real. Burt Lair, he slaps her for real, right? Because she can't stop laughing because they're giving her these drugs, and he knocks her teeth out, right? And then she has to walk around throughout the rest of the movie, and up until she did the See You in St. Louis, Judy Garland wore false teeth for the rest of her life, because this guy slapped her. Lisa says the Tin Man's makeup had an allergic reaction. The lion's costume was made of real lion's fur, which was apparently too heavy. Exactly, yeah. I forgot about that at least. So there's a whole bunch of technical mishaps before they even get to the actual film. You know what I mean? Like the story within a story of the making of the movie needs to be a movie in and of itself, because this was just incredible. You know what I mean? Like the way they were totally unprepared for this. You know what I mean? And think of the time frame too. It wasn't like a lot of people had a lot of money to see movies. This was the Great Depression. You know what I mean? That was going on. But for some reason, during the Great Depression, movies did make a lot of money. Like there were a lot of the classical era, like Hollywood golden age is in the 1930s during the Great Depression, Gone with the Wind, Snow White, and of course this film. You know what I mean? So something happened that you wouldn't think would have happened, that people are starved for cash, but at the same time, going to see these movies. Maybe they wanted a distraction. Three Little Pigs, also in 1933, that Walt Disney puts out, his first cartoon in color, first cartoon short in color, The Three Little Pigs. You know what I mean? So, or maybe it was just the studio. What if, Lisa speculating, what if Walt Disney had acquired the rights? Would he have done it better? Would it have been something that he could have approached better? We'll get there when we talk about not this film, but part two. We'll get to what Disney does eventually do with it, which sucks. So probably not. But when they made it part two, Walt Disney wasn't alive, but he was alive for this. So who knows? It could have been different. Could have been better. He had better experience with stuff like this, but he always had problems getting the rights to these stories. You know what I mean? They even made a movie about it recently called Saving Mr. Banks, about his struggles to get the Mary Poppins script from the woman who wrote it. You know what I mean? Like, because Walt Disney would change shit. So probably the story of The Wizard of Oz would be totally changed if Walt Disney had acquired it, because he did it with the Jungle Book, he did it with Snow White, he did it with all these stories. He would get it and he would put his own spin to it. He would Disneyfy it. So maybe it wouldn't have been as good. But let's jump into the film itself. Again, Judy Garland as Dorothy, Terry as there were two dogs that were Toto. Toto the dog, that's another mishap. Toto the original dog got injured, and they had to get another dog, right? So there were two dogs that played the character of, the character of the dog Toto. But here they only have uh, one dog listed. Ray Bogler, who, like I said, he was the guy. He wanted to play the Scarecrow, but they put him as the Tin Man. Then they switched him and the second guy out as the Tin Man. Jack Haley as the Tin Man, and Burt Lair as the Cowardly Lion, the principal cast. So we begin in Kansas with Dorothy. She's basically a mischievous girl. She gets into a lot of trouble. You know what I mean? And she has an incident with a neighbor where the neighbor, Toto got into the neighbor's garden, and Toto bit the woman. So now the woman is coming to Dorothy's homestead, her farm, saying to her that she got to confiscate Toto, that she got to take Toto because Toto is a vicious dog. And Dorothy's like, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Punish me. Send me to bed without supper. She's telling her aunt Annie M and her Uncle Henry, because she is an orphan. She doesn't have parents. But the lady takes her anyway. So she sings and takes the dog anyway. So she sings Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Basically, this wasn't, of course, in the original story that she sings this, but this was added because of Judy Garland, being a singer. They wanted to add music to it. So she sings Over the Rainbow. Toto escapes out of the woman's basket, and he goes back. But Dorothy knows now that they have to run away because she'll just come back and she'll just try to take Toto again. So they go to this guy, Mr. Marvel, right? They use the Marvel name in Wicked as well, right? They go to him. He's like a fortune teller or whatever. And he says that he can help Dorothy escape from to somewhere else. But then a tornado comes, and Dorothy's in her house, and she goes back, and her house is blown away, and her house arrives in the land of Oz. And it lands on the Wicked Witch of the East. And she steps out of there, and that's when you see the film. It started off in all black and white. As as the house is going, she's passing the woman who tried to take her dog is getting blown away too on her bike. But when she arrives, she opens it up, and it's all in color. Now, this is one of the best shots in all of movies, because while not the first movie in Technicolor, it was the first movie done to this scale on Technicolor. And it's beautiful. And she's walking out. She says the iconic line, "Toto, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore." And she runs into Glinda the Good Witch coming through in the bubble. Basically, and Glinda asks her, "Are you a good witch or a bad witch?" She goes, "I'm not a witch at all." I'm not. Witches are old and ugly. And she said, "Well, what would you do if I told you I was a witch?" And she goes, "Oh, my apologies. I didn't know you were a witch." She said, "The Munchkins are telling me that you landed in Oz and killed the Wicked Witch of the East. Is that true?" And Dorothy is shocked, but eventually Dorothy is given the ruby red slippers, and she is told that if she wants to get home, what she should do is follow the yellow brick road and go off to see the wizard, and the wizard will grant her wishes. She'll be able to go home. Now, along the way, she meets the Scarecrow, who mentions that he doesn't have a brain, The Tin Man, who mentions that he doesn't have a heart, sings a song, If I Only Had a Heart. And of course, the Cowardly Lion, who mentions that he does not have courage. And these three friends, they're off to see the wizard, to go to these four friends off to see the wizard, each for something that they desire and they want. And they face trials, like we said. They pass out. They go through the Valley of the Poppies. They pass out to go to sleep. They go to sleep. Um, the flying monkeys of the Wicked Witch of the West capture, because the Wicked Witch of the West wants uh, Dorothy's slippers. Now, in Wicked, it's stated that she wants the slippers because they belong to her sister, right? But in the original story, that's not really made explicit. Even the relationship between them is not made explicit. And in the book, she's not even the Wicked Witch of the East is not even the Wicked Witch of the West's sister. They're just different witches of different directions. Even Glindola is the Good Witch of the South. Because I always wondered, like, you have the Wicked Witch of the East, the Wicked Witch of the West, and the Wicked Witch of the North, which is Glindola in the movie, but you never find out who's the Wicked Witch of the South. But in the book, there's a different Wicked Witch that greets Dorothy when she first arrives in Oz, rather than Glindola. But they cut that out in the movie. So she's chasing her. She wants the ruby slippers. So she sends the flying monkeys after her, and they capture Dorothy. Now it's up to the friends to rescue Dorothy, and they dress up as the guards again. Something that Wizard of Oz Star Wars copied from the Wizard of Oz when they capture Princess Leia. Han Solo and Luke Skywalker dress up as stormtroopers, the same way these dress up as the as the guards of the Wizard of Oz. Now, at first, they go to Emerald City. They don't let them in, right? She is turned down, but eventually they do let him in. They have the big Oz face. He tells them if they capture the witch's broom and they bring it back to him, they can get what they want. The Scarecrow can get a brain, the Tin Man a heart, the Lion courage, and Dorothy can go home. So they do that. They get into a skirmish with the Wicked Witch of the West. She throws fire on the Scarecrow. His arm burns, which, knowing that what we know about now in Wicked, the relationship makes it kind of weird. You know what I mean? That she would attack him in this way. But this is this is what. So to put the fire out, they throw water out, and the water hits her face, and she melts. And they capture her broom. Now they take it to the wizard. Now he has her broom, but he still doesn't grant them their wish. And they're arguing with him, right? He gives the three, the Cowardly Lion, the Tin Man, and the Scarecrow, medals. But he always had courage. He always had a brain. He always had a heart. He didn't really give them anything. But so what about Dorothy going home? Finally, she gets mad and Toto gets mad. Toto pulls back the curtain, and we find out that this is not some scary wizard. This is just some guy, you know what I mean, pretending, a charlatan, basically a con man, pretending to be a wizard, not a real wizard at all, no magic whatsoever, right? Toto pulls back the curtain. So he takes the balloon home to Kansas. So now Dorothy's stuck. Everybody has what they wanted, but Dorothy doesn't have what she wants. And then finally, Glindola the Good Witch, played by Billy Burke, she appears and she says, Dorothy, you always had that ability too. All you had to do was click your heels 3 times and say there's no place like home, and boom, you were going to go home. Right? So, and that's the end of it. Then it's a dream sequence. Dorothy realizes that it was not real. Her uncles are there. You were there, and the old man. So, and this is the end of the story. Now, Although a classic film, at least am I missing anything? Now, my opinions of it. I always thought, I always thought, and I'm glad Wicked came out, and I'm glad Wicked fleshed these answers out. I always thought Glinda was a bitch because you knew Dorothy could go home the whole time. Why didn't you just tell her in the beginning? Look, all you had to do was click your heels uh, 3 times, and you can go home. Like, why did you make me go through this? Why did you make me do the bidding of this asshole, the Wizard of Oz, who he doesn't even have powers. You know, he's not even he can't even do magic. And I'm glad Wicked answered these questions. And Wicked finally said, you know what? Maybe Glinda didn't even know. Like Lisa said, maybe she didn't even know that you could do that because she had no magic herself. She was a complete fraud too. You know, you know what I mean? So, like, it was crazy. And it was released to tremendous fanfare, like I said, because nobody had ever seen a movie like this. Now, over time, people have developed theories about what it really meant. L. Frank Baum, like I said, he was political. He was a liberal of his time, a suffragette. So even if you're not explicitly writing a political allegory, you think of these things, you're involved in local politics, you put these things in your fiction, your writing, even when you're not consciously thinking of it. According to him, his initial goal of creating it was he saw the children's stories that are out. He started writing in 1899. He saw the children's stories that were out at that time, mostly from Europe, like Hansel and Gretel, Snow White, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty. They were all like dark, you know, they all involved death, they all involved scary stuff. So he wanted to create something that was lighthearted, you know, that, you know, kids could still have the fantasy element of it without having the really scary stuff. I mean, Hansel and Gretel, the witch tries to kill them, tries to eat them, right? She's a cannibalistic witch. So that is pretty dark. But ironically, Wizard of Oz became sort of dark as well. You know what I mean? Without him even realizing it. But here's the political part. Like I was saying, at that time, there were debates about switching to currency. A lot of people wanted paper currency because it was easier for the government to control. You know, they could control inflation prices with the Federal Reserve like they do. They could control what things cost. You know, they could create inflation. They could create control monetary policy by creating inflation. Before that, everything was really pretty much paid for with gold or silver coins. And you can't really control that because gold and silver are finite resources, right? So you can't really control that. So people that were bimetallists, people like L. Frank Baum, they believed in sticking to the metal part of it. They believed that greenbacks like the Emerald City were an illusion, right? And that people that were pushing for this new monetary policy, like William Jennings Bryan, who was running for president at the time in the Populist Party, that they were charlatans and they were con men. So this is supposed to represent the Wizard of Oz. And they believe that the people that would be affected by this the most, by this switch from gold currency to paper money, would be the ordinary citizens like Dorothy's family. So he was basically, he formulated the argument in this children's story that don't believe these slimy politicians like the Wizard of Oz. You know, they're like the Wizard of Oz, right? They're like the man behind the curtain telling you lies and telling you that, oh, once we switch to paper money, your life will get better. For the industrial worker like the Tin Man, or the farmer, the rural person like Dorothy or the Scarecrow, or for the military industrial complex like the Cowardly Lion. And also, the Cowardly Lion was meant to represent um, politicians that were cowardly, like they wouldn't stick up for the ordinary people. They talk a good game, but they were really con men and really cowardly, pussies. Basically, the liberals. You know, the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? Liberals are always talking a good game, but when it's time to put up or shut up, they back down most of the time. So it was like that during L. Frank Baum's time. But in the movie, the political aspect of it is really downplayed, because by the time the movie comes out in 1939, the Federal Reserve was already established in the early 1900s, and the issue is resolved. So the political debates surrounding it really are a moot point by the time the movie is released. But I just thought I'd mention it because how people interpret the politics of the story. But that's pretty much it, guys. That's the original story. We'll be doing other series. We'll be doing Return to Oz. We'll be doing Oz the Great and Powerful, and the little adaptations like The Wiz in 1978 and the 2005 movie starring Ashanti that aired with the Muppets, the Muppets in Oz. So there are a lot of adaptations of it, as well as we'll be doing the Dreamer of Oz movie on L. Frank Baum's life. This story is interesting because, like I said, this is the first American fairy tale ever. You know what I mean? And it was a time, the late 1800s. Thank you, Lisa. It was a time, the late 1800s, early 1900s, when fairy tales were being written with kid protagonists. You had Lewis Carroll in the 1860s writing Alice in Wonderland. You had J.M. Barrie writing Peter Pan in 1901, and you had this. But J.M. Barrie and Lewis Carroll, they were in England, so that's a little bit different. This was in America. This was set in the American frontier. Like I said, because L. Frank Baum lived in Aberdeen, North Dakota, for a long time. But he was homesick. He was born in Syracuse, New York, but he was homesick when he was living in North Dakota. So, because he felt like, it was uncivilized dealing with Native Americans. Like I said, the racism, no excuse for that. The racist writings in his writings that are reflected even in The Wizard of Oz with the depiction of the monkeys, no excuse for that. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't age well. You try to pin him as a liberal icon, but then again, he's this racist. But you would think that would happen to people that were on the frontier at that time, dealing with wars between Native Americans and whites. You know what I mean? You wouldn't think that he, as a white man, would have such a positive opinion of Native Americans, dealing with them, going to war with whites constantly. Like, he was basically, when he was in Aberdeen, he was living like a Western, like he was living like Bonanza or some shit, and like, or a Little House on the Prairie as a homesteader. And it was very dangerous for whites, living with Native Americans. Not making excuses for it. They should have even been there. You know what I'm saying? They were white colonizers. But, that was his opinion. And it doesn't age well because, we now think differently about manifest destiny and the conquest of the United States and of the Americas in general and indigenous people. But at that time, we didn't. You know what I mean? Like, even Peter Pan, all the way in England, has scenes, negative depictions of Native Americans. So, I mean, whenever we talk about these people from history, we got to remember that they lived in a different time. They existed in a different time. They had different prejudices than we have. You know what I mean? So we talk about, say, Walt Disney and his anti-Semitism, right, or his anti-black racism with the crows in Dumbo, or L. Frank Baum with Native Americans. Pretty much, other than that, L. Frank Baum's record is pretty good. You know, like I said, fighting for women's rights and fighting for environmentalism and being a spiritually open-minded person as a theosophist in the early period. So, while not a perfect person, of course, the woke people of today, they want to judge everything by today's standards, and they want to cancel everybody. Everybody should be canceled because of they made a comment about Native Americans or Jewish people or some other group. You know, back then in a time when things were different. You know, I mean, again, it doesn't make it right, but it just is what it is when it comes to that. You know, but you know, yeah, thank you, Lisa. This is the original story, and you know, I think Wicked made it better. You know what I mean? Made it make a lot more sense because, like, the characters are really one-dimensional. I mean, that was the question that Wicked sought to answer. Why is the witch wicked? Like, what made her that way? And Wicked answers these questions and answers a lot of the questions that we have as far as you know, what I'd like to see though is go even further back, and you can make, like, how did Oz come to be? Like, what was the origin of Oz? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you could do so much with it if they went that route. But unfortunately, you know, maybe they will now. Wicked has made so much money and been such a phenomenon on Broadway and on screen now that they will do something like that. Hopefully they do, because there's a lot of stories to tell within this universe. Anyway, guys, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you, Lisa, for contributing. Love you guys. Peace.